Имам огромна чест и задоволство да ве поздравам на денешниот настан, кој всушност представува дел од едукативната програма на 8-то издание на Философскиот филмски фестивал. Философскиот филмски фестивал е една манифестација што еве веќе години наназад се организира во соработка на Институтот за филозофија при Филозофскиот факултет во Скопје, Филозофското друштво на Македонија и редовни институции кои што се наши одржувачи и покровители. За присутните студенти овдека, особено оние од младата генерација, особено е важно да се истакне дека развојот и растот, да кажем, на филозофски фестивал е една успешна практика која што покажува дека со ентузијазам, со посветеност, со добар фокус и со синергија, односно со кооперација, можат да се постигнат чудесни резултати. Со радост се сеќавам на почетоците, за тој се викаше Филозофско-филмско фестивалче, меѓутоа како резултат на желбата и посветеност особено од наши колеги, особено на Јана Митова, зашто и денес нашите колеги кои што се најако вклучени во неговата организација, еве прерасно во една респектабилна институција, може да се каже од светски размери. И јас исто така би сакала да ви ги пренесам поздравите од раководителот на Институтот за филозофија, професорот Undren, кој што поради претходно закажани неодложни обврски не можеше денес да дојде во институтот, така што ете ме замоли мене да ја преземам тавол како представник од Институтот за филозофија. Исто така друга новина во денешното издание на Филозофскиот филмски фестивал, особено неговата едукативна програма, за која е особено силно поддржана од страна на Филозофскиот факултет, е воведувањето на сосем нова тематика, односно филозофија за деца, на која што ќе биде посветено и денешното предавање на нашиот уважен гост. Оваа проблематика кај нас предизвикува интерес со години, веќе цела деценија наназад, но досега не сме имале можност за нејзино систематско проучување и воведување. Нашиот колега Марко Боговски, кој што има магистратура од методика на наставата за филозофија, на неколку награди ја популаризираше по своите истражувања оваа дејност, меѓутоа особено сме среќни што денес со нас е еден светски афирмиран стручњак што се занимава со оваа проблематика и што ќе се обиде да ни прикаже собствените искуства од работата на оваа дисциплина, особено тој напор во најраното филозофско доба, односно во детството, да се сензибилизираат младите за критичкото размислување, истражување и развивање на љубовноста и феноменацијата. Ви благодарам на сите, се надевам дека навистина и во текот на целото издание на Филозофскиот филмски фестивал и во текот на нашата денешна средба ќе имаме можност за стимулативна, инспиративна размена на гледишта и искуства, од која што понатаму ќе произлезат исто така многу значајни резултати. Благодарам. А сега ја поканувам директорката на Филозофскиот фестивал, на колежка Ана Митова, да ја представи нашата програма и да го отвори работниот дел.
Се радувам дека сме поголем број, дека ова може би покажува дека филозофијата како и денес е релевантна и дека оној мит за филозофијата како една абстрактна, недофатлива, некој ќе рече дури анахрона наука, дека паѓа во вода. Токму овој напор што го правиме преку Филозофскиот филмски фестивал на поврзување на филозофијата и филмот на еден јазик и начин кој што ни е развил и нас денес во секојдневието, а исто така и филозофијата за деца како дисциплина, се овие обиди да и се даде и една практична нота на филозофијата и затоа го зборуваме денес за филозофија за деца. Зборуваме не само за филозофија за деца како дисциплина, туку зборуваме за филозофија за деца пред се како практика. Значи, не зборуваме изучување или предавање филозофија за деца со деца, туку би било практикување на филозофија со деца. Ова е дисциплина која што зачна во 70-тите години, започна во Америка со таткото на оваа дисциплина, како што го нарекува Метју Липман, и од тогаш се прошири доста во светот и низ Европа. Од Данска го имаме како представник тука Ларсson, а во Македонија ова е за прв пат на еден ваков начин да ја представиме оваа дисциплина и оваа практика Со надеж дека може би овој ќе отвори еден простор или ќе создаде можеби хайдегеријански лифтун, буквално за да можеме да размислуваме во една таква насока, сега ова да биде некоја иницијација и да размислуваме активно заеднички како би можеле филозофијата за деца да ја воведеме и формално и неформално во нашата земја. Филозофија за деца инаку се работи и со наставници, со млади истражувачи на филозофија за деца. Веројатно Девид ќе ви каже во неговата презентација исто така работат и со родители, кои што исто така сакаат да практикуваат со своите деца во еден неформален амбиент. Оно што јас би го упатила само како една генерална назнака, филозофијата за деца е дисциплина која што последниве 10 години и последниве особено 3-4-5 години е особено поддржана од УНЕСКО. УНЕСКО генерално е една организација која што ја поддржува филозофијата и промоцијата на филозофијата. Убаво кажано во една прекрасна фраза на една од публикациите на УНЕСКО, Philosophy a School of Freedom, филозофијата училиште на слободата. И токму тука се наоѓа она што е идеја на филозофијата за деца, односно не филозофија за деца како начин за изучување на Платон, Аристотел, Кант или Хегел на деца од 6-7 години, тоа не го правиме, туку како еден начин за развивање на креативната мисла, критичката рефлексија и ако зборуваме во контекст на едно граѓанско општество, на развивање на граѓански активизам преку развивање на оваа критичка свест и критички дух, но исто така и една емоционална интелигенција во процесот на диалог, слушање со другите, толеранцијата и прифаќањето на различните типови на гледишта. Во контекст на фестивалот, значи, ова е дел од едукативната програма Философија, така ја рековме символично. Ние имавме еден обид пред 4 години со доктор Мартин Куковски, кој што е стручен сработник за овој дел од програмата на фестивалот. Имавме едно предавање, Мартин сигурно се сеќаваме тие што бевме на предавањето, пред 4 години тука во предавал на УСУН. Треба ли да ги учиме децата филозофија? Сега, веројатно со предпоставка дека сме го абсолвирале во прашање, дека веројатно треба да ги учиме, еве го имаме овој пат тука со нас Девид Ларсон. Ова беше идеја долго време, која што сакаме да оставиме, но конечно се погодија некако куцките на соживалката и еве оваа година со Девид во едукативната програма ќе имаме можност да слушнеме нешто за филозофијата за деца и за тоа како се практикува во Данска. Само накратко да го представам Девид. Девид доаѓа од Данска, има завршено филозофија и јапонски јазик во Центарот за субјективитет на Универзитетот во Копенхаген. Инаку специализирал во областите на феноменологија, филозофија на духот или филозофија на умот и Zen Buddhism. Веќе долги години се бави со оваа област на филозофија за деца и работи во непрофитна организација во Данска, која што ја шири оваа идеја за Socratic Wonder или Сократовското чудење, како би го нарекле. Тоа ќе биде интересно Девид да ни го објасни во рамките на предавањето, а покрај тоа работи со филозофско советување, она Philosophical counselling, веројатно дел од вас имате слушнато книгите на Undren и цела една таа струја што постои, така што ова се неговите моментално области на действување. И сега без да должам понатаму, би го поканила Девид на говорницата да ви каже малку повеќе за филозофијата за деца и за тоа како ние имаат воведено во Данска. Јас само можам да ве поканам на филозофски филмски фестивал кој што започна утре на 12 и крај до 19 април во кинотеката на Македонија. Благодарам.
Good afternoon. My name is David Larsson, and today I will be talking to you about the practice of philosophizing with children. Before I start, I'll just briefly say a word of gratitude to, first of all, the Philosophical Film Festival here in Macedonia, and the Philosophical Society of Macedonia, and of course, not least, the Philosophical Department here at the university for inviting me. I'm very thankful that you want to hear my opinion and my experiences with doing philosophy for children. And I hope that some of my speech will be inspirational for those of you who might be considering doing philosophy for children yourselves here in Macedonia. Also, before I start, I just want to add, I think Anna just said it, that I'm not formally trained in philosophy for children. I am a Master of Philosophy and Japanese from the University of Copenhagen, and I specialized in philosophy of mind, phenomenology, and Zen Buddhist philosophy. And I mention that because that's one of the key points I want to make today, that you don't have to be trained in philosophy for children. You don't have to have a vast amount of theoretical knowledge in order to be able to philosophize with children. So what's really important when you philosophize with children is your ability to be present and your ability to listen to their opinions and to respect the thoughts that they have. So that is really key when you want to indicate to children, to show them that their ideas matter. So let me just please give you a brief overview of my lecture today. So the first one, basically, the first part will deal with what philosophy for children is. I'll also be discussing what philosophy for children isn't. I'll try to sketch out some of the main traits in the discipline and try to tell you about what a good philosophical practitioner who works with children should be able to do. Then I'll try to also give a brief outline of philosophy for children in Denmark, and also the perspective from the organization that I work in, which is called Undren, which loosely translates as Room for Wonder. And next, in the next segment, I want to go into the more practical dimension of philosophizing with children. I will be giving examples of how exactly you can philosophize with children and show the various means. And in the third and final section, I'll go through some of the frequently asked questions and also discuss some of the topics that you have to consider if you want to engage with children philosophically. So there are some points of discussion in the field, in the discipline today, and I'll just briefly try to sketch them up and give my own opinion on them. So moving on to the next slide. What is philosophy for children? As you can see, there's a picture here of a lot of different books dealing with the field of philosophy for children, and most of them are written within the last few years. This is just a small portion. Thanks. And that is to indicate that the field is very multidimensional, it's very varied, and there are many different approaches and opinions as to how philosophy for children should be practiced. So what I will be doing is to try to give a broad outline of what you could call the key traits that are agreed upon in the field. So the next slide. The first question that people tend to ask when I tell them that I philosophize with children is, are children even capable of philosophizing? Isn't philosophy too difficult? Isn't it too abstract? Should they even be philosophizing? Isn't it dangerous, perhaps? Couldn't it lead to skepticism, both moral and scientific? And the brief answer to that is the next slide, please. Yes, of course, children can philosophize. These are some of the questions that you can philosophize about with children. Let me just pick a few of them. What is justice? What is happiness? Does life have a meaning? Are you never allowed to break the rules? What does it mean to have an opinion? So, as you can probably see, these are pretty deep philosophical questions. And of course, one of the important things when asking these questions is how you ask them. And you have to relate them to the children's own worldview. You have to ask them in a way that engages with the natural propensity to wonder that they already have. So the next slide just gives some basic factual information about what philosophy for children is. It's an educational approach based on the assumption that children can and should reflect philosophically from a young age. It's a diverse discipline. It has developed over the last 40 years and is currently practiced in approximately 60 countries. So when I leave Macedonia on Saturday, I hope we can make that 61. It's also a thorough pedagogy with considerable academic pedigree and an increasing number of research studies documenting its positive effects. I'll return to discuss those positive effects in a minute. So, to start off then, philosophy for children is not an introduction to the children about abstract philosophical theory. It's a way of philosophizing that is expressed through action, not theoretical monologue. So, when I philosophize with children, I'll not be standing up here and they'll be sitting down there as we're doing right now. I'll be engaging with them, I'll be interacting with them a lot. And that's really core if you want to understand the practice. Two, it's not a course in the history of ideas or specific philosophers such as Plato, Kant, or Hegel. These philosophers have said important things, of course, about what happiness, justice, freedom is, and so on. But we don't want to mention them explicitly when we philosophize with the children. The most important philosophers in the room are the children themselves. And third, philosophy for children is not concerned with arriving at correct answers. So when you philosophize with children, there is no agenda apart from teaching children the value of philosophizing. I'll also be returning to that point to elaborate it a bit more. So, what's the focus in philosophy for children? I make it a rule of thumb that it deals with answers that can be Googled. And by that I mean questions that you can't expect Google to answer for you that are perhaps strictly personal. It might be, how should I lead my life? Or if you're in a life crisis of some kind, perhaps when you're an adult, you're getting a divorce, you've lost a child, you don't know which education you should pick, which career. Can Google help you find an answer to these questions? I think it's important to teach children at an early age that you have to think for yourself about at least some questions in life, and philosophy for children can do that. A second aspect is philosophy for children is informed by, but not preoccupied with academic philosophy. So by that I mean, again, you can take ideas from Plato, Kant, and so on. You can introduce them implicitly when you philosophize with children, but never explicitly. They'll just make them lose focus. So when I say informed by, you can extract perspectives from academic philosophy, but you shouldn't overdo it. Again, you should remember the key point that you should make the children philosophize, not tell them what to think. And thirdly, again, the focus is non-empirical knowledge. So it's a philosophical, not a scientific inquiry. So let me just elaborate that point, what I mean by that. And of course, when I talk about scientific inquiry here, it's the most simplistic way possible. So I basically want to say that scientific inquiry and philosophical inquiry provide different answers to the same questions. So, for instance, when you talk about what is time, a physicist would give you an answer based on observations in space or Einstein's theory of relativity or so on. But when you ask children the question, what is time, you will move into more of a phenomenological area. You might discuss ideas that are reminiscent of Bergson's Tom Duret or other ideas like that. So, as I've written up here, scientific inquiry, again in the most simple form, is deduction from observations, whereas philosophy for children is a collaborative inquiry anchored in life experience. So you don't want the children to echo what they think they should say. You don't want them to talk about theories that they might have heard if they're old enough to know any scientific theories. You want them to reach into their own lives and consider the philosophical questions from that standpoint. So that's why I've also singled out that scientific inquiry is, again, very simplistically put, empirical, whereas philosophy for children is existential. And finally, the goal, I would argue, in science is to reach for truth, or truths in plural, whereas philosophy for children wants to at least lead them onto a path of wisdom. That's why I've written it in citation marks, because, you know, a 10-year-old who's wise, I guess you could hear children say wise things, but when I've written it like that, it's more to lead them onto the path and to show them that you can understand the world in many different ways, and you can also understand the world in a way that makes sense to you, that speaks to you and to your own life experience and your own existential terms. So the next point, what does it require from stimulating the children when you philosophize with them? Well, first of all, and the most obvious one, I guess, is it stimulates self-reflection, and it also requires a basic degree of self-reflection. You want the children to be able to express why do they think what they think. So, of course, this also requires some basic conceptual awareness. And it roughly starts, and there are, of course, various theories about this, but 4 or 5 years old, that's around the age that children can begin to articulate why they're saying what they're saying, and not just say, well, just because. And the next thing that it requires, and that's really important as well, collaboration. So the children have to be able to collaborate in some basic sense, since philosophy for children is based on the idea that you work together to solve, or to at least arrive at some kind of answer to this philosophical problem that you're discussing. And also it requires an ability to listen and engage constructively with the opinions of others. And as you can see, it requires and also stimulates these points, so it enforces them and strengthens them in the children at the same time. Moving on to the next. This is a question that a lot of people in the educational systems around the world are very interested in which academic skills does philosophy for children develop? And I'll move on to argue in a minute that philosophy for children is about much more than that. But for the moment, let's just stay put here and see what it does. First of all, it teaches children how to make arguments and state reasons. It also teaches them to look for new possibilities and perspectives. It teaches them to use thought experiments and examples, and again, examples from their own life. And this point is also, I believe, critical when you want to convey an idea to a different person. Isn't it easier when you can just relate to an experience that you both had than just trying to say it in an abstract manner? Another thing it does is it helps them to discover hidden assumptions and premises. So as you perhaps saw in the beginning, is it sometimes okay to break the rules? So when you have a rule, you have the hidden assumption and the premise that the rules shouldn't be broken. But sometimes there might be a cost for breaking a rule. I think the classic philosophical example of that is if there is a lake and someone is drowning and it says no swimming, can you go and save them? And that's a very concrete example, of course, of breaking rules for a higher cost. Also, it develops the ability to listen to and understand other people's way of thinking, and to empathize with why people think the way they think. It helps children also to create structures and see new patterns. And it helps them to define and convey abstract ideas and concepts such as love, friendship, freedom, and the like. And as I've also said several times already, and I cannot emphasize it enough, it helps them to relate the insights of philosophical inquiry to their everyday experience. Next, these are some of the benefits of philosophizing with children. For instance, the first one, philosophizing with children can lead to substantial improvement in children's academic performance across subjects. So again, building on what I just said before about the skills it helps to develop, you can see how, for instance, mathematics and history, there might be some kind of thing or some way of thinking that links them. For instance, causality or something like that, or seeing new patterns of thought, new ways of seeing things. So when children philosophize, they have a better ability to think across these various subjects that we usually as adults bring into different subjects, maths, languages, history, and so on. So, and that point here actually is based on empirical research from a study in England where children were subjected to philosophy for children. It was made part of their curriculum for a year, and they had, I think, 1 or 2 hours of philosophical discussion in their class a week. And when the year was over, they had increased their academic performance across all subjects, corresponding to 2 or 3 months of conventional education. So again, that's to show that it can really boost the way that children think and act in other disciplines and other areas as well. Another important thing is that it improves children's self-esteem. And that is, of course, because when you feel that someone is really listening to you and taking your ideas seriously, that improves how you feel about yourself. Thirdly, it provides an opportunity to think more deeply and create new connections to previous ideas, concepts, and knowledge. So again, that ties up with the first point. The children are better able to relate various things they experience to each other. They see these new connections. From a more pedagogic perspective, it develops social skills, such as turn-taking, active listening, waiting, working with classmates who are not necessarily your best friends, using different volumes of speech, and daring to voice your opinion in front of the class. So again, and that's one of the points I want to stress today, is education is about much more than academic performance and knowing right and wrong answers. It's also about educating children to be human beings, perhaps you can even say good human beings that are able to live with other human beings. It also provides an arena where children can try out their ideas and dare to think big. And people are, as I said in the beginning, often surprised at the fact that children can philosophize. And actually, if you just ask children, what do you wonder about? What questions do you have today? They'll tell you some amazing things. I sometimes do that when I run these philosophical sessions. That's the first thing I do. I ask them, okay, so what are your questions for today? And I write them out on the blackboard. And they have all these questions. And some of them might be, why do we have earthquakes? Why does it rain? But they also have questions like, do angels exist? And is there a God? And I think it's thought-provoking that children have these ideas themselves on a random school day, for instance, Monday morning. That's what they're thinking about when you ask them, what are you thinking about? And they can give these examples of what I would call natural wonder. And I think it's so important that we integrate this wonder into the way we teach children in schools and the way we think about education. Philosophy for Children also creates a space where students who do not yet have fluent literacy skills can succeed. And again, that's because philosophy for children takes place as action. It's dialogical. We speak about philosophy, we talk philosophy. We don't sit down and write dissertations and papers about philosophy. So even children who might not normally perform very strongly in traditional terms in their subjects, they can participate. And often when I run sessions and the teacher, a normal classroom teacher, is often present, and they're surprised because they can see that what they normally consider to be weak students, they thrive and they really feel at home in a setting where you are not evaluated on right and wrong answers, firstly, but second of all also on which skills you're supposed to have in this subject. And lastly, and that point here is one that my organization really has experienced a lot due to the way the Danish educational system is put together. It's that Philosophy for Children provides a space for minority students and students with special needs, for example, ADHD and Asperger's syndrome, to participate on equal terms. I don't know how the school system in Macedonia is, but in Denmark, the primary schools, state schools, governmental schools, are expected to include students with special needs in their classes. So you will have all these children who are, again, normal children, and then you have these children who have perhaps ADHD, and they have to be there. And often teachers experience a lot of trouble with these kids because they can't sit still and they can't do what a good normal student is supposed to do. But when you philosophize with these children, they blossom and they show different sides of themselves. And also, they add some pretty good perspectives to the discussions because they can challenge the status quo. They are really good, these students, especially students with Asperger's syndrome, and looking at things from different perspectives that we don't already see. And that, in my opinion, is also one of the critical tasks of doing philosophy and of being a philosopher. Point out that which we think we already know, and then turn it around and say, hey, you can also look at it this way. And that's what these children can do. So as I mentioned at the outset, there are different branches of philosophy for children. So now moving more into what you would call the historical development of philosophy for children as a discipline. So P4C or PWC stands for Philosophy for Children or Philosophy with Children. And again, these two stand for, the first one stands for, should we do philosophy for children in a way that we introduce philosophical ideas to them? Or philosophy with children is, should we do philosophy for children in a way that we listen to what they already think about and engage with that? That's the most basic way of understanding this distinction. And P4C, as traditionally understood, is founded by Lippmann, which I will introduce in a moment. Whereas philosophy with children is dominated by people like Cyril and Methodius and Thomas Wardenberg, etc. So So P4C, the traditional method, is focused on philosophical problems. Again, the teacher or the instructor or the philosopher who goes to the school already has an agenda in some sense. They want the children to discuss a philosophical theory or principle, of course on the children's own terms, but still they want to introduce an issue from academic philosophy into the children's world. Whereas PWC, philosophy with children, is more focused on their natural wonder, as I just said. And the last point here, that's just my personal opinion, and it's up for debate, but I think that P4C and PWC, this distinction, in some ways mirrors the split in academic philosophy between the analytical philosophical approach and continental philosophical approach. And you can also see that from the various theorists that the two approaches are informed by. So usually philosophy with children is informed by, for instance, Gadamer, Arendt, and other German thinkers, whereas the P4C is more focused again on philosophical problems and philosophical issues. So moving on to Lippmann, he is generally recognized as the father of philosophy for children. And he founded the Institute for the Advancement of Philosophy for Children at his university in the United States in 1974. And he's famous, of course, for trying to introduce some specific rules or principles for how to do philosophy for children. And the first of these is that philosophy for children should be a community of inquiry. And by that he means it's the room for learning which a facilitator must establish and be part of. And this idea is inspired by C.S. Peirce and John Dewey, who talk about community of scientific inquiry. Next, Lippmann also introduced the principle of having discussion plans, that is, a list of questions centered around a philosophical problem. And when you do this, the first questions are often relatively simple, and then they gradually become more and more abstract and difficult. And lastly, he also introduced the principle that philosophy for children should be based on exercises, philosophical exercises. And that, of course, is the main tool for stimulating philosophical reflection, training argumentation, and developing critical thinking. I'll return to these various exercises later on. So this organization that I work for is called Undren, and yeah, again, that's translated as Room for Wonder. And our approach is that wonder is the driving force in philosophy for children. And perhaps I should add here, now I've referred to the whole field as philosophy for children, even though I just introduced the distinction with children. That's because today there's a general consensus that we call philosophy for children. This with children distinction has kind of faded in the last 15, 20 years or so. So when I talk about philosophy for children now, I mean it in the broadest possible sense, not in the Lippmann school sense. So we believe that wonder is and should be the driving force in philosophy for children. By that we mean that the aim of philosophy for children is to reconnect children with their natural propensity to wonder and to sustain this attitude in them. That is, in other words, to reinforce the children's own curiosity. We also believe that philosophy for children is about much more than making children think. Again, we don't believe that children should focus on philosophical problems that we introduce to them. You should focus instead on children's development as a whole and not just their academic performance. So it's more of a pedagogic approach. Thirdly, we believe that philosophy should be creative and versatile. Philosophy, as we see it, is not just based on conceptual discussions. So there are many different ways to engage in philosophical debate and discussions. For instance, some of the ways we do it are plays, drawings, legal constructions. For instance, when you ask children to do a theatrical play, which they have to come up with themselves, by the way, you ask them, well, can you define what friendship is by acting friendship? And when you talk about drawings, I'll return to this point as well, can you draw the invisible? And well, as for legal construction, can you build a feeling? So we do this to stimulate, really get back to the core of philosophy and try to make them think, is this even possible? So I've got some examples of what a feeling can look like when you build it in Lego. So these are some of the constructions that children come up with. And the next one is an example of what, okay, well, the text is not there, but I think it should be anger. Is this anger? What do you think? And the next one is, oh yeah, there it is. And sadness. Is this sadness? So when you ask children to build these constructions, you don't, of course, just leave it at that. You engage with them, you talk with them. Why did you build sadness like this? Is there anything about sadness that is really expressed in the way you did it here? And then you use this concrete construction, which they built themselves, to get them to elaborate their thinking. And another point that's important here is that when you ask them to construct something, they start thinking while they construct. So when you say, we have 20 minutes now to build some feeling that is dominating in you right now, well, then they start to think while they construct it, how can I express this? So it's also a way to get philosophy into their bodies, out of their heads and into their bodies, into this space between us. The next one, yeah, it's an overview of philosophy for children in Denmark. So, as I just mentioned, Matthew Lippmann started philosophy for children in the United States and internationally in 1974. In Denmark, the movement started in the 70s and 80s with people like Jespersen, Hofer, and others, and they were inspired by Lippmann's approach. But the problem with their way of working with the children was that they didn't collect any evidence, they didn't collect any data that supported what philosophy for children can do. And that's a general problem in the field right now, and also one that we in my organization is trying to figure out how to do. How do you measure the effects of philosophy for children? Because that's what people want to know if you want them to give you money or to invest in something. They want to know, well, what do I get out of it? Of course. So it kind of faded. And then in the early 1990s, the Ministry of Education in Denmark launched a pilot project. And it had rave reviews. And the teachers, the children, and the parents, they loved it. And they thought, this makes really good sense. But nothing came of it. The government didn't go any further with it. So for a long time, nothing really happened. And then around 2010, what I call freelance philosophers, P4C philosophers, began to appear. And they started their own regional projects here and there. And this too was very successful, although again, they didn't collect the data. Again, this might be because these various philosophers were more interested in doing philosophy than collecting data and thinking about this theoretical side of it. Then in 2014, my organization, Untitled Wonder, was established to support and develop philosophy for children in Denmark. So our approach is based on phenomenology, creativity, and wonder. And we think that's important to introduce into the field in contrast to the way that it's originally been done, again, by Lippmann and others who want to focus on philosophical problems. We develop teaching materials, games, and exercises, and conduct philosophical sessions at schools and kindergartens. We also train teachers, volunteers, and nursery school teachers in workshops. So if some of you are attending the workshop that I'm running tonight, you will see how we train teachers and other staff that work with children in how to philosophize with them. And lastly, room for wonder. We consider creative expression and wonder to be crucial when we do. Can you hear me still?
Yes.
Okay, good. So the latest development is in 2017, there was a big research project that was started at the University of Southern Denmark. It's called Philosophy of School. It's based on the work of the Philosophy Foundation. And this project will try to document what the effects of philosophy of children is. So it's a large-scale project which my organization is also contributing to, not directly, but with our perspectives on how to run philosophy for children. Again, the research project is based on the Littman School, and we want to engage them with our approach and to show them that children can benefit from being exposed to more creative ways of philosophizing. So, moving back to a session with the children, what characterizes it? Well, first of all, philosophical wonder, and open questions. So as I just said, you might just start a session by asking, what do you think about right now? Which questions do you have in mind right now? It's also a search for the best arguments, the right answer. And a lot of children are often confused when I say this to them, or when they get a sense that that's what's going on. Because children are so used to in the classrooms, to teachers expecting them to say certain things. So when we move them into a field of inquiry where there are no right or wrong answers, they're often confused. And especially the children who are very good at navigating right and wrong answers, what you normally would call strong students, they're even more confused because what do I say now? I have to think for myself. I have to reach in. I have to reach back to this existential dimension of education. Another characteristic is that it's non-dogmatic. Everything can be doubted. This part is very difficult for adults to work with, especially people who are used to working with the children in primary schools. We are so used to having the right answer when we ask children a question. And we're so used to the idea that a teacher should instruct them in some way or other on ethical principles and so on. So that this might be in the form of saying, well, you can't say that, or that's just a silly thing to say. That's one of the most common things I hear when I run these sessions and the normal teacher is present in the room. If I forget to say to them at the outset, please don't interrupt, let me just run the session, they'll often say, oh, don't say such a silly thing. You're interrupting the discussion. And the key point here is that, well, you can philosophize from silliness as well. Sometimes even a silly thing to say, or even if one of the children farts, you can use that as well. That's my idea, at least, about philosophy for children. Because again, it anchors the concrete experience. It's the here and now. It's not what we're supposed to think, what we're supposed to do. We want them to anchor their way of thinking in the here and now. So, what are the observable indications that philosophical reflection is taking place in the child? Well, the most obvious one is silence. I don't know again how the classroom environment is here in Macedonia, but in Denmark, in the primary schools, there's a lot of noise. But when you philosophize with children, often you'll be struck by how silent the classroom goes. Again, this comes from, I believe, the fact that the children have a strong sense that someone is actually listening to them. And also that you're moving into this field of inquiry which they're already, in some sense, aware of, but not fully conceptually aware of. By that I mean, of course, a wonder, that they're wondering about things. Another indication is that you hear them making arguments, stating reasons. So they might say, well, I think this because of that. They start to give examples. Well, if David goes to school and does this, then it means this.
Another one is that you can start to see signs that self-reflection, self-criticism is taking place. So just imagine a child saying in the classroom, well, I said something before, but now I changed my mind. I think, as I've said before, it's a magical experience, for me at least, to see that. To combine the first point, the silence, the fact that children pause before they speak, and then hear them say, well, I changed my mind. I think that's a very important skill, if you want to call it that, to teach children as well. And it's okay to change your opinion. That engaging in dialogue is not a war or debate on right and wrong, but that you can engage and learn from others. And final indication is that you see strong signs of group interaction. So this might be in the form of children saying, well, I agree, or I disagree, or what do you mean, why do you think so? So group interaction is important in the sense that you want the children, ultimately, this is in the dream scenario, you want the children to interact with themselves. So as an instructor in philosophy for children, you want to lay into the background. You don't want to run the discussion for them, ideally. Of course, normally when you introduce it to them, you will have to do that. Otherwise, they'll just start arguing in the sense that it's not very constructive. But in the ideal scenario, you want them to get to the point where they engage with each other, ask each other questions. Why do you mean that? Can you give me an example of that? Instead of, as usual, telling each other, well, you're wrong, I'm right. So again, basic group interaction, social awareness. Next one, please. So to summarize what a good P4C or philosophy for children practitioner should be able to do. If someone who challenges children's way of thinking by being constantly inquisitive. Again, this is to stress the point to the children that everything can and should be doubted, at least when you're running this room of inquiry, this collaborative inquiry. Also, you should ask questions in a way that opens the dialogue instead of closing it. And by closing it, I mean, for instance, taking them to a specific point that you want them to reach. And again, this, I believe, is one of the ways that we normally talk about or think about primary education. We want the children to reach certain conclusions, so that, in that sense, I try to make them come to the conclusion that freedom is this and that. Freedom should be thought of as this and that. But instead of leading them, I want to ask open questions to them so that, again, I can engage with their wonder, their thoughts, instead of pressing my own thoughts on them. Also, you should restrict yourself from praising or criticizing certain ideas and opinions. And the important thing here is that it's both verbally and non-verbally. And this too is very difficult for a lot of adults to do. What do you do if you hear signs of racism when running a session of philosophy for children? Or what do you do when you hear them criticize each other in a very non-constructive way? Or if they say something highly inappropriate under normal circumstances? And it's difficult as a practitioner of philosophy for children not to frown, for instance. But it's pivotal that you try the best you can to be as neutral as possible, and again to engage with the way of thinking behind this inappropriate behavior, or what you want to call it. So you could, for instance, say, well, why are you saying that? Or why do you think so? And stimulate the child's own thoughts and force them to think it through again. Also, you should help to lift the conversation in the room from concrete to the abstract and back again. So again, when you talk, with the children about their personal life examples. We want to help them see, okay, what are the philosophical themes here? What could we talk about? And then you take it back again to their own lives so they can use it to arrive at this pursuit of wisdom or insights that we want them to arrive at in some sense or other. Also, you should know when to pursue a line of reasoning and when to let go. And this, of course, has a practical dimension, but also a theoretical dimension. The practical dimension is that sometimes we have time limits. Often have a time limit that's pretty strict. So even though some idea or input from the children is very interesting, you have to restrict yourself to the general discussion that is taking place. Because if you don't do that, the children will start talking about 5 or 6 different philosophical themes at the same time. So they love to talk about what they think. And the theoretical dimension, again, is a little bit related to the problem of appropriateness. So sometimes you have the time and the awareness to engage with, for instance, a racist remark, and other times you don't. So you have to have a strong intuition of, okay, when to ignore it, when to just let it go, and when to engage with it. And finally, you should also be able to strike a balance between thinking and acting exercises. And by this I mean, in the first case, thinking exercises are dialogues based mostly on conceptual distinctions and talking about what is love, what is freedom, and focusing on words, whereas the acting exercises are some of the examples I showed before. How can you express a feeling through legal construction? Or how can you express friendship through acting? So, an example of how I do it when I go to the schools. One of the most popular themes that I philosophize about is what is friendship. So, if we move on to the next slide, you can see some of the questions. Yeah, just press the there are lots of. Oh, sorry, can you just move up? So, what is a friend? That's the first question that I might ask the children. Can you define what a friend is? Then you can ask them, well, can you be friends with someone you've never spoken with? You can also ask them, well, who can you be friends with? Are there different kinds of friendship? And this is one of the questions, or one of the themes, to use an example, where academic philosophy can inform the dialogue. For instance, Aristotle, as you probably are aware of, has said a lot of important things, interesting things about friendship, which we can still think about today and use in our lives. If you know the distinctions that Aristotle came up with, you can have them in the back of your mind to kind of help the children distinguish between, for instance, different kinds of friendship. I believe Aristotle devised 3 different kinds, right? He said play, people you play with or relax with, and people that you use for practical reasons. And finally, you had true friendship, which is the kind of friendship where you don't use each other. You don't have a function, you just have being together as the primary way of being together. So, if you could please take the next one. So, here are some examples of what I might ask the children. Can you be friends with an animal? Or can you be friends with a machine? Could you be friends with an idea? And this last one, oh yeah, a teddy bear. We're jumping a bit back and forth. And I think there's one more actually. Yeah, there you go, a computer. So, as you can see, these are artifacts or objects that they know from their own life. And a lot of children actually, to me at least, that's very interesting, that they actually think that you can be friends with a computer. So a concrete example of that is this iPad app called Siri. And they say, yeah, I'm friends with Siri. I'm like, okay, so what do you do together? Well, we play games together. Okay, well, can Siri talk? Yes, she can talk. Okay, can Siri think? Well, she can reply to questions and help me understand things. And she can play games with me. Okay, is that enough for you to call it friendship? So those are the kinds of approaches you can do if you want to engage philosophically with their own experiences. The final one here, can you be friends with an idea, is particularly amusing to talk about with the children. Because they might first say, well, of course you can't be friends with an idea, that's preposterous. It's a stupid question. And then I asked them, well, do you have an invisible friend? And they're like, yeah, of course I do. Well, what's the difference? And then they're like, oh, okay. So they start thinking. And here's an example, the next slide, of what I heard a guy say, a little boy who was 10. He said, well, if you want to understand the difference, David, it's a difference between ideas and representations. You know, what I think and what I imagine. And I was like, I didn't really know what to say to that, because when I came back home that day, I was thinking, that's something that I think David Hume or something would say, right? But this was a boy, he was 8, 9 years old, sitting in the back of the class, and actually this boy, he had been so tired of me coming and teaching them philosophy because he thought it was boring and pointless. So I had some, try to instruct him, like, well, perhaps we can talk about this and this. I spent some time talking with him, and then he came up with that all of a sudden, out of the blue. What's the difference between ideas and representations? So I love that example personally. Here's another theme that I might talk with the children about. What is language? What is meaning? Who decides the meaning of words? Is meaning contained in the word itself, or is it somewhere else? Where is it? Where is this meaning? So, to conclude this first part of this lecture, to summarize what people see as philosophy for children is, what it is not. So it's not a course in the history of ideas. It's not an introduction to philosophical theory. And it's not a coalition of children to arrive at preconceived truths. For instance, scientific truths, or what we might call the right answers, moral answers. On the contrary, philosophy of children is the practice of engaging children in philosophical thinking and interaction through Socratic questioning. It's a path to enter into deep philosophical territory, but always implicitly, never explicitly. And it's a non-dogmatic and neutral. It's non-dogmatic and neutral. It's interested in good arguments, not right opinions. It has no agenda apart from the pursuit of philosophical wonder. So I next want to, if we can move to the next one, give you some examples of how you can philosophize with children. I think something is missing from that slide. So, first of all, I believe you need to be equal to the child in the state of wonder. You have to move down to their perspective. Again, when a child asks, well, why do we have earthquakes, or do angels exist? Instead of giving them an answer as the first thing, that's very tempting if you know the answer. Try to engage with the wonder behind it. Well, why is this important to know? Why do you want to know this? Second, you also have to respect the child's perspective. This goes without saying, of course. They can feel it immediately if you don't respect what they're saying. You don't listen to them. And I think there should be a third one. So you yourself, as an adult, doing this, use your own imagination and creativity. And this creative aspect is particularly important with young children, because you often have to improvise. As I just said, sometimes someone falls, and you can use that. Or something happens, someone falls from a chair, and people and the other students start laughing. You can, well, what's fun about this? Stimulate the way of thinking constantly. And it's in those moments, when you do that, when you capture the moment, something unexpected happens, that you can get the strongest feedback from the children. Because they realize, okay, this is not just a set scenario. This is not just a guy teaching me things that I should know. This is an approach to life. So I think there are, so when you talk about wonder, you also have to question yourself, well, is it an atmosphere or an attitude? And I'm tempted to say both. It's both an attitude and an atmosphere. You can create an atmosphere of wonder in a classroom if you yourself have this attitude and you also want to help the children attain it. And as for the last part, when we talk about imagination and creativity, you can also philosophize, well, basically in two ways. You can do, as I just said, you can be spontaneous, or you can be planned. You can plan what to talk about in advance and have a very minute, detailed plan outlined from the outset and a list of questions. Or you can be spontaneous. Or you can be both. I'm usually both. So I have a plan and then I deviate from the plan. I hope to deviate from the plan. If I don't, that means I haven't done my job well enough. I haven't engaged with the children. I've only been talking about what I want to talk about. So let me show you what traditional people see as conceived by Lippmann, how they teach philosophy to children. They call it the vanilla model, and they do that because vanilla, as they say, is the basis for something better. So you can just add things to it. So first of all, you have the participants in the classroom, and you expose them to some sort of stimulus. And I'll show you what I mean by stimulus in a moment. But for now, let's just say I show them a teddy bear. And then you ask the children to come up with a philosophical question in response to the stimulus. Then the participants, the children, make their questions public. For example, they write them on the blackboard. Then you have them read their question out loud and explain where it came from. Then the participants vote democratically on the question they want to discuss. And usually each participant takes 2 votes. And then once the question is selected, all the participants write a response to it. And then if you're the one who has the question that was picked, for instance, if I have a teddy bear, you might say, well, what is a friend? Can you be friends with a teddy bear? And then you start the inquiry. Then you start the collaborative inquiry to broaden your understanding. And again, it's important to emphasize that it's not a debate. It's not about convincing you that you're wrong and that my viewpoint is correct. It's engagement with each other. And as the 9-point participants reflect then on the concept of the inquiry once you're starting to end the session, and finally you reflect on the classroom community. So the difference between those two is, of course, the first one, what did we talk about? Did you learn something new? Do you have more examples? Would you like to talk about this again? Would you like to think like this again? And the last one is, well, what did you think about the way it went? So were the other students good enough at staying quiet when you said your opinion, or were you frustrated by something? So that's kind of the pedagogic dimension in there. So the way that my organization, we run most sessions, again, that's the rule of thumb. We start off by opening the philosophical room. Again, by that we mean we want to basically convert every single classroom we enter into a room for wonder. So we might do this by giving the children some sort of stimulus. For instance, I'll get back to these in a moment, but we have these cards. Imagine that everything is a dream, or imagine that you could get everything you wished for. So we asked them to think about this for 15, 20 minutes or so. And then they come up with some idea about how this kind of world would be. Sometimes we ask them to do it individually, sometimes to do it 2 and 2, 3 and 3, 4 and 4. Once you've done that, you have a philosophical theme to work with. Then you start formulating questions with the child. Then you move into philosophical inquiry, where you want to, again, understand why they think what they think. Then you get to the answers. And as you can see, there's an arrow going back. You can call it the loop of wonder, if you like. We want to stay there. We want to keep them in the loop of wonder. We want them to be constantly asking questions. Well, why do you think that? How can you think differently about this? And should I be thinking differently? Are there any ethical dimensions in this? So we want basically to stay in the loop as long as possible before we move to another theme. So here are some of the ways, and they're kind of hard to read, but different ways to stimulate philosophical reflection. You can start with physical objects, children's books, your imagination, drawings, and short films. So I'll elaborate on these now. So the first one is physical objects. Here. So here's a photo of a group of children doing philosophy. And in the center of the room is a little bit hard to see, but there's a teddy bear. And they're talking about the teddy bear in the way that I just talked to you about. And some of the benefits of using a physical object is that it's dynamic. You can use it to move attention around the room. You can hand it to the child, you can place it in a circle as you do here. But you can also use several objects. If you do this, you anchor the child's opinions and arguments in the objects. It makes it easier for them to engage in a conceptual dialogue when they have something concrete and tangible to use. And again, it's a three-dimensional thing. So it appeals to all of their senses. You can say it's a rule of thumb, the more senses you appeal to with an object, the better. The more alive it feels. And a final benefit that I've listed is that it creates a strong real-world connection to things from their own world. So again, I might bring an iPad, I might bring a phone, I might bring a teddy bear, I might bring a car. Something that they know already from their own world. So the next kind of stimulus is children's books. And one of the benefits of using children's books as a starting point of philosophical inquiry is that it focuses the children's attention in a natural way. Virtually all children love to have a story read out loud to them. Also, it creates an opportunity to pause, reflect on themes, words, concepts, and so on. It gives you the opportunity to speak to the imagination. For instance, asking the children to predict, well, what will happen next, do you think? Why do you think that this will happen? What if it doesn't happen? Also, it helps to add external input to the children's ideas in a simple way. So for instance, if you already talk with the children about friendship, and you read one of these books on, and there's some kind of theme of friendship in them, you can stimulate the children's ideas indirectly through characters or ideas from the books. And finally, and this is an important point as well, it's simple to do. It does not require a vast knowledge of philosophy to philosophize on the basis of children's books. And this point is often made by Tom Wartburg that I mentioned earlier. And he recommends this third book, Frog and Skopje Friends. I don't know if you know them. They're two funny characters that children can relate to, and they do funny things. And we'll meet them later in one of the short films. So, how how do you philosophize using the imagination? This is one of the approaches that my organization has come up with, and I just showed you an example of. So here are some others. Imagine that time stopped. Imagine that everything was upside down. Imagine that you could not get scared. Where does the world begin? So, one of the benefits of using this kind of stimulus is that it creates a space to wonder without falling into the right or wrong category. When you ask questions to the children's imagination, you're saying, you're conveying to them, you're saying very directly, in a way, I don't know the answer, but you don't know the answer either, but let's find out together, what would it be like? And also it appeals to the children's tendency to create imaginary worlds. So again, when we talk about children and philosophy, children don't often ask each other what is the meaning of life or what is friendship, but they do create imaginary worlds. So when they eat an ice cream, they might say, well, what if the world was made of ice cream? So what we basically do is just we pick up on what they already do and we ask them to philosophize over it. And it also creates a subtle path into deeper philosophical inquiry, and I'll show you in a moment. One of the ways it does this, we move to the next, is that we often, in addition to asking the children to articulate their ideas, we ask them to make drawings. And then we use the drawings themselves as the stimulus for the next part of the discussion. So when we ask them to do this, it helps them develop self-reflection and inner dialogue. Just like building Lego and making a drawing. It forces you to sit still and focus your attention on one thing. So what would the world be like if it was upside down? Is an example of this. You have to start thinking for yourself, well, what would it look like? And that way you can visualize and structure your ideas. And it also, as you can see, this is me standing in the classroom. We've placed all the drawings on the floor. We call it an art museum. Say, let's make an art museum. And then we place them all on the floor and we walk around or we sit around them like this. And it's a clear illustration to the children that there are many different answers to the same question. So perhaps 2 or 3 children have made a drawing of what the world would be like if it was upside down or if time stopped. So they can get a sense that, well, their own perspective is not the only one there is. So let me show some examples of what these drawings often look like. Imagine that everything was upside down. And here's what this girl said. Then you could walk on the ceiling in the clouds. You could say hello to God. So you use, oh please go back. You can use this drawing to move further into philosophical reflection by, of course, picking up on the idea of, well, what is God? Another example, imagine that rocks could speak. And then you have all these rocks and they're saying blah, 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 and he, yes and no. And the child who drew this drawing said, well, the rocks would tell me stories about the old days, but they would also have to learn to be quiet. You understand that when you see how talkative they are in this drawing. And you could also ask them questions about your great-grandparents. And I love that example as well, because you can talk to children about mortality, you can talk about time, you can talk about relationships. So again, it's picking up on the themes that come up and what the children bring into the dialogue. Oh, another example. Imagine that you could not die. And then this child said, well, it wouldn't be nice if I couldn't die. And then this boy in the drawing says, my friends are dead. And this child, I remember, initially, he thought it was great. You know, if you can't die, you can just eat ice cream forever, and you can just play computer games forever. It's great. But then, when I engaged with him, talked to him, he started reflecting on it, and he said, well, yeah, of course. What if the question means that I couldn't die, but everyone else would still die? And this was an entry point into questions of value. What is important in life? Relationships, currently to this child. Your family, friends, your parent is dead. What's the use of living forever? And I think that's also a valuable point to make even to a 9-year-old boy or girl. I think there's another example as well. Yeah, expect the unexpected. So imagine what bird language translator would look like. This is one of my all-time favorites. If you press the button, you can see a translation. It says, peep, peep, hello, idiot. And this is one of the challenges of suspending moral instruction. Because under normal circumstances, you would probably tell a child, well, it probably wouldn't say that, or you shouldn't talk like that. But then again, you know, who knows what birds are saying? And who knows the meaning of words? And, you know, perhaps for a bird, idiot means something nice. You never know. So you can, again, engage with the children from their own ideas. Here's the relatively new one. Imagine that you have eyes on your feet. And this kid said, well, my feet would be tickled by the grass because I wouldn't wear shoes. So again, you have some kind of reasoning taking place, right? It would also be difficult to play football. But what if I needed glasses? So what would glasses look like if you had to wear them on your feet? So again, it forces the children to think in different ways. And then we have the next example, is the title of this talk I'm giving today. And I picked that title because I think it illustrates very strongly what this whole idea of philosophizing using imagination can do. And then you might ask, well, why haven't you used a drawing here? And that's actually because a lot of the children find this question to be the most difficult to draw. And they have various different examples. And sometimes they want to keep the drawing themselves. I always ask them, well, do you want to give me the drawing? And often this one, apparently, they want to keep it for themselves. And, oh, please go back, yeah. So, one of the first things you hear the child say when they get this one is the most frustrating one to get. Well, how can I draw something that I can't see? And then when you start to talk to them about this problem, then you stimulate their own reasoning again. You say, they might end up saying, well, if I walked around, I would bump into things, but would I even be able to see my hands if everything was transparent? Or could I see myself? Could I see my hands, but I can't see anything else? What would it be like? And in the end, you know, they might come up with a philosophical distinction. What would be the difference between the world being transparent and my being blind? So again, you have core philosophical themes being introduced through their own imagination. And I've listed some of them, you know. Here you can say the epistemological themes. How can I attain knowledge if I can't see anything? Or metaphysical. What is the world I already know like? Existential. What would it be like to live in a world like this? And ethical. Can I do anything I want if nobody can see me? That's also a pretty good question to ask an 8-year-old who might want to be candid. So another kind of stimulus is short films. And this is the point in this lecture where you get some a pause from me talking, because I'll show you some of these films. But first let me list some of the advantages of doing it this way. First of all, it's audio-visual. It moves the children to a different setting and back again in a relatively simple way. Also, it allows you the chance to rewatch the same movie 2 or 3 times so that you can track the progress in your child's thinking. So we want them to ask, did I see something different this time, or can I see now what someone else said? Just that I couldn't see at first. And it also allows you to stimulate dialectical thinking. For instance, by showing the children 2 or more films, so you can compare films relatively easily. So I'll show some examples of that. Oh yeah, so here's a list of basic themes and some links. Yeah, so if we move to the next one, we can see an example. What is identity? So before showing the movie, I might ask the children, well, what makes you, you? I don't want to ask them what is identity, because they wouldn't understand that question. Well, what makes you, you? And then I try to get the class to give some kind of preliminary definition. And they might say something like this: well, my body, my family, my name, they're all essential parts of who I am. That's what makes me me. Then I can also ask them, well, how do you become yourself? And that child might say, well, in a way it just happens, but sometimes you must dare to be yourself. Because they already get a sense that being yourself is not a static thing, it's something that's a progression, something that you become. Then I can also ask them, well, are any parts of you more essential than others? And typical answer to that would be, perhaps my body. So if you click one of the links, the first one is my zebra. Yes. So this is the point where you get a break from me talking and you can watch this short animated film if it's working. themes do we see here in relation to identity? I'm testing you.
Identity crisis.
Identity crisis, yes. What is an identity crisis?
Oh, when you're not sure if you are who you previously thought you were.
Yes.
Also.
Exactly. So how do you know who you are? That would be a good question to ask a child. Anyone else with an idea?
Being different?
Being different. How do you mean?
Because in the end, like, no matter how much he was changing, he felt that although he was different than the others in first, it was still okay, and they acknowledged him as such, and then he acknowledged himself as such.
Yeah, so even though you're different from your kin, you can still
Yeah,
have an identity in the group. Yes.
Is changing good or bad?
Yes. Yes. That's another good question.
Acceptance.
Acceptance. Yes. Yes. What we just heard, basically. Yeah, that's the same one. I'll say.
Authenticity.
Authenticity. How do you mean authenticity?
Because we are all unique.
Yeah.
Zebra, zebra.
Yeah, that's the question. And that's also one of the ones I ask the most frequently. So, is a zebra without stripes still a zebra? That's a good question to ask a child, because that's the essence of being a zebra, is that it has stripes. But what happens to this one? Is it still a zebra? So that was just one example. So let's move back to the slideshow. So let's just not go to the other link, because it's kind of the same point. And here's just another example of what willpower is as a philosophical theme. And again, I might get a preliminary definition from the children, and they might say, well, willpower is intentionally not doing something which you otherwise have a strong urge to do. And an example, of course, would be not eating fast food, not eating candy, not playing computer all night, even though you really feel that that would be a nice thing to do. And last week, I asked this, and it was to some older students, they were 14, I asked this question. And pretty quickly, I showed them one of the videos, which I don't know if we have time, probably not. Do we have time to see one of them? No, I'll just explain what it's about. I can just summarize. It's the one called Frog and Toad. And it's these two friends that I just mentioned earlier from the picture book. And one of them has baked love cakes or cookies, and he takes them to his friend Toad, and they start eating, and soon they find out that they're so delicious that they can't stop. So, at the same time, they know that if they keep eating, they will get sick to their stomachs. So how can they prevent themselves from eating all these cookies? So one of them comes up with some ideas. Well, we can just put them in a box and tie it up with string. And the other one says, well, we could just cut the strings. Okay, well then, if I took the box with the string and put it on top of a bookcase, and then the other one says, well, we could just take a staircase or a stair and just climb up there, or a ladder and climb up there. And then finally, the one who tries to come up with a solution, he just goes out and gives them to the birds. And then the other one is like, why did you do that? Well, we don't want to get sick. So the question to ask the children after showing that movie is, of course, is that an example of willpower? What is the essence of willpower? What's the most important if you want to conceptualize what willpower is? And in this case, most of the children in this class, they said, well, willpower, that is taking, it has to do with choice. So it's not doing what you want to do because you prioritize doing something else instead. Something that might be better for you to do. And at this point in the discussion, I thought it was kind of wrapped up. I thought that was like, okay, that's your definition. And then one of the kids, and he has ADHD, and he normally doesn't contribute very much to the classroom discussions, and he's one of the children who often has a hard time sitting still and gets a lot of negative attention. And he said, well, he thought that giving away those cookies, that was a pretty good example of willpower. The other group said no, because they took away the choice, and the choice was the essential part. But he said, well, if you give away that which you want the most, isn't that an example of willpower? You sacrifice what you desire the most. And I thought that was a pretty interesting perspective to get as well. Okay, so let's move forward. So, what are the most frequently asked questions when talking about philosophy for children? Well, the obvious one is which age group is ideal? And to that I say all ages, as long as you adjust the level of abstraction and stimuli. And of course, as long as the child is able to have a conceptual discussion and to explain why they think what they think. And also, the sooner the children are exposed to philosophical perfection, the better. And the younger the child, the more effective it is to connect through wonder. For instance, if you're working with 5 or 6 year olds who want, again, to pick up on their own imagination rather than imposing some kind of philosophical theme. Another question is it necessary to be trained in philosophy in order to philosophize with children? And I would say yes and no to that question. There are some pros and cons. The pros are, well, as a philosopher, you're used to navigate in a philosophical landscape. That is, to relativize opinions, values, and assumptions, challenging the status quo. Also, you can recognize themes, perspectives, and distinctions, and nuances from the history of ideas. Some of the cons are that you might have a difficulty adapting to a dialogical, not a monological format. So that is especially relevant to the next point. You might experience a difficulty restraining yourself from saying to the children, well, I know someone who said that once. And when I started philosophizing with children, I did that a lot. I found it very difficult not to mention Aristotle. And I actually had one point in the beginning, I even held a mini lecture in Aristotle for 7-year-olds. And I don't think they got all of it. I think they got some of it. But that kind of was I failed to reach them as strongly as I could have by engaging with what they already were thinking themselves. And some points for discussion. Should philosophy for children be an independent school subject, or should it be integrated into existing subjects? This is a question that my organization is dealing a lot with at the moment, because of course there are some ideal situations and you have some pragmatic things to consider. So, of course, ideally, I would say, yes, let's have philosophy for children as a fixed part of the schedule for children from a young age. Let's give them this open room, this free room to share in the wonder that they already experienced, that they already carry with them. At the same time, you have to be a little bit pragmatic, and you want to introduce it slowly, then you can integrate it into existing subjects such as languages or maths. And do that by, for instance, starting every class, the first 10 minutes, trying to capture the wonder that is already there. For instance, just by writing the questions out on the blackboard and just giving some space for that. Another point of discussion is philosophy for children really neutral, and also should it be? And this points to what I think perhaps is one of the most critical issues in the whole discipline of philosophizing with children, namely, whose values do we teach when we teach children philosophy? And also, can we avoid a Western cultural bias? And my initial response to this is, well, education is already based on certain ideals, principles, and values. So in the end, the question is not should we teach children certain values, but how do we do it? Philosophy for children can shed light on these existing values in our school systems. And it teaches the children to scrutinize them critically, and also, most importantly, find out whether or not they accept them. And if you have to say, well, philosophy for children demonstrates certain values, then I would say it's this inquiry, collaboration, and respect for diversity. And I think those are pretty good values to teach children from a young age if we want them to grow up and be responsible members of society. So, as I've indicated throughout, there are many different ways of doing philosophy for children. And you can ask, well, what are the aims? And it depends on your own disposition and your own inclination when you want to do it. So is your aim strictly to develop critical thinking? Or do you have a broader interest in developing a philosophical attitude in the child? Is your aim to establish consensus, or is it to accept and to, in a way, praise diversity? And is your aim to strive to reach conclusions and come up with answers, or is it to remain in a state of wonder, to teach children the value of being open-minded and constantly trying to explore the world and themselves? So my closing remarks is very wide, but philosophy for children is meaningful, and it's very giving on a personal level, and it's also an important activity. And philosophy for children is, I think it's supposed to say, very disciplined. There are lots of different ways of philosophizing with children, and what I talk about today is just my way, or our way of doing it. There's so many different ways, and it's still open for development, and perhaps some of you might come up with other ways of philosophizing that really captures the attention of Macedonian children. I hope so. And also, I hope to have strongly made the point that anybody can philosophize with children. So that's my argument, that you can all walk out of this room right now and walk home if you have your own children, or go to a kindergarten. You can start philosophizing right now if you want to. You don't have to know anything. You just have to be open-minded. You just have to be able to take the children seriously and to stay in a state of wonder. Try not to look for the right answers. Try not to start this truth-seeking machine that you have in your mind that knows all the answers. Try to remain in a state of wonder. And also, I hope to at least have stimulated some thoughts on what I take to be perhaps one of the most important philosophical questions, namely what matters. So if we want to talk about philosophy for children, we have to talk about what is philosophy, what is education, what's important, how do we want to create our societies, what do we believe is important as human beings, and what kind of future do we want for our children. So, thanks for listening. And I don't know, we've got 3 minutes for questions.
Yeah, that's okay. Does anyone have a question? Ако некој има прашање или поставете на македонски, да ги преведуваме.
I was wondering, where does philosophy for children and big boy philosophy pick up? Because I noticed in one of the slides you placed chronological argument, do ideas, words by themselves have meaning, or do we give them? And also something like Kant's categorical imperative, I believe, should be taught to children, like in what situations it is good or not. So I was wondering, where does philosophy for children leave off, and where does regular philosophy pick up?
Yes, that's a very good question. And I would say this goes back to the question as to how we should integrate philosophy for children in schools. And I would say ideally it should be a subject separated from other subjects alongside classic philosophical instruction, such as an introduction to ethics, to Kant, to other philosophers, Descartes. Again, I'm very biased because I'm a philosopher myself. I like the more philosophy, the better. So if we're going to have both, that would be great. But I would say, as a start, if you really want to reach the children, start with the philosophy that's already inside their heads instead of imposing your adults' thinking on them. I think that's much more powerful. If you want, I guess you also have to ask, what do I want to gain from this? Do you want to teach them how Kant thought about morality in order to make them better persons? Well, if that's the value you're trying to protect, what you're trying to do, I would still say it's more powerful to engage with them instead of telling them what to do and what to think. that's the best philosophical attitude in that situation. I hope that answered the question.
I have a couple of questions. The first one, you mentioned that to start philosophy, the earlier the better for the children. But in your opinion, which is the earliest age that the children can do philosophy at? And the second question is about one particular method in teaching philosophy for children, and that is Karen Murray's method. Well, she created a special picture books in which stories are narrated in more than one level. As an example, she uses the classical story of the Big Red Wolf and the Three Little Pigs, and she changes the story, and when the wolf blows the house down, the pig's house down, at the same time the wolf blows the pigs out of the story. And that happens with all the three pigs, so the pigs then use the paper of the picture book to make airplane and to travel through many different stories. So Morris thinks that that helps children to think about things from a meta level. So do you think this method is overcomplicated? It is not philosophy for children, or it is suitable to do?
So, can you just explain the example that you gave? So she reads stories out loud?
No, she creates special picture books, changing the original ones with the pictures that characters are blown out of the story itself.
Yeah.
Make paper planes from the paper that book is made of, and travel to other stories to the same thing. So do you think that this method is overcomplicated or not?
I would say it's just a different way of doing it, and there are so many ways that you can do it. You might reach certain children better that way. You might reach other children better the way that I'm talking about. So you can say overcomplicated in the way that you have to make a lot of preparations.
No, or complicated to use it as a method at the class.
No, I wouldn't say so. Not from what you're saying. I don't know that example.
And maybe it will confuse the children. I don't know.
I guess since Morris has been doing this, and I think she's been doing it for a long time, she has some good experience with it, and she's published books about it, so I think there must be something to it. I don't know it that well personally, but yeah. And diversity, again, is so important when we talk about philosophy for children. So the more approaches, the better, I would say. As long as you reach the children, you have to be, again, present in the classroom. And if you're talking to them and you can see they have a dead stare, then you're wrong. You should move in another direction. And as for the first question, it's difficult to say again. I would say the same thing. You have to be aware of the child. Look them in the eye. Are they getting what you're talking about? And that could be approximately, for some it might start in my experience, as early as 4 years old. Some it's 7. It depends on what conceptual awareness they have developed at that point. So it really depends. You have to be aware.
Има още някакви прашения?
Има. French President Macron proposed 3 years of age for starting school. In Macedonia, we lack in education 3 main skills: how to learn, how to think, and how to create dialogue. What do you think? Are all children by birth philosophers because they are inquisitive and they are just, to my mathematical formula, they are 2/3 philosophers? They could observe and ask questions, not having skill to have assumptions. I have your comment.
So the question is, are all children philosophers from their birth? I would say it depends, of course, what you mean by the term philosopher. What do you mean by philosophy? And And if you mean what I've been talking about here, curiosity, wonder, as this natural propensity to look for answers and explore the world, I think if you define philosophy as that, then yes, children are philosophical from birth. I think Aristotle starts his metaphysics with the same point, right? That humans by nature desire to know. That's what he says, right? So I think if you take that perspective, yes. If you want to talk more about being philosophically inclined in the sense that you enjoy being in this deep thought mode that I think a lot of us in here might like, since we're in a philosophical department, then that's my own perspective and that's my own experience on it. And that's roughly 1/10 of all children, or something like that, have this inclination. And that's just my own very non-empirical conclusion, but I base it on the looks in their eyes when I go to classes. So when I start philosophizing for the first time, that might be a child who's 14 years old. They've never experienced philosophy before. They have never heard anyone ask them questions like, what is the meaning of life? What is freedom? What is truth? I can see in their eyes that they are hearing something that is already there, these questions, and they have been hungry for someone to ask them in school. I see those eyes, and I also see some of the time, perhaps 80–90% of the students at first sitting, they can't relate to it at first. But I would say 1/10 of all children, and that's just my very non-scientific estimation. Yes?
Would you agree that your lecture or your subject would be called more philosophizing for children than philosophy for children? Since to my mind, there are two basic components,
Yes.
logic and ethics.
Yes.
Because not only philosophizing, but philosophy is more, to my mind, practical, how to behave. So, if you teach children how to philosophize, means how to have critical, creative, and proactive thinking, but at the same time, ethical behavior.
Yes, but what do you mean by ethical behavior?
Ethical behavior?
Yeah.
To live by ethical values.
Okay, so who decides those values?
I beg your pardon?
Who decides those values?
In the Western world,
Yeah.
we have values based on three main subjects:
Yeah.
logic, logos, nomos, and praxis. That, to my mind, three basic values.
Yeah. So when you talk about ethics, you mean those three should be taught to children? Is that what you mean?
In various forms, not like philosophy or philosophizing.
Yes.
Because children couldn't catch what is philosophy, for example. But
Yes.
they could sense or understand
Yes.
the ideas or values.
Yes.
Since their mother is the first teacher,
Yes.
teaching them skills and values.
Yes. But also, I think we agree, teaching them skills so they can reflect on the values themselves, right? Instead of just accepting the values, that these are the values you should live by, and ask them, well, why do we have these values in the first place? Without, of course, descending into skepticism.
To my mind, skills and values with ideas are three elements of education. At the beginning you said, I was not trained in
Yes.
philosophy.
Philosophy for children.
It's wrong, because trained means skills. You get educated in values and ideas.
Oh yeah, so if I can just elaborate on that, I was saying that I was not.
It's American vocabulary to be trained in medicine or philosophy.
Yeah. So what I meant when I said that, and I might not have been very clear about it, is that I was not trained as a practical philosopher working with children, and I said that as a disclaimer, saying again that theoretical awareness of the field is not so important, but engaging with the children is what's important. So, so what I also think I tried to convey throughout is philosophy is a way of being with other people, right? So I guess I would agree with you that we shouldn't talk about philosophical skills. What I was talking about was philosophical or theoretical knowledge of a certain discipline. So that's just what I meant when I said that.
Maybe we can skip. There is another question.
Yes.
You said that every one of us can go and do philosophy for children.
Yeah.
But I don't think so that every one of us are P4C practitioners a priori. How difficult or how simple is to train P4C practitioner? Because before we go in a classroom full of children to make P4C, you have to have a trained P4C practitioner, if I'm right.
Yes.
And what's the process in your experience? Because I think that the first level of introducing P4C in classrooms is to have that kind of practitioners.
Yes.
Trainers, I don't know what.
Naturally, yes, of course, you're right.
How to teach the teachers, how to train the trainers.
Yes.
That's my question. How simple or how difficult is this process?
Yes, another good question. And to begin with, what I meant when I said that anybody can walk out of this room and philosophize is, again, get back to the attitude of philosophizing. And one simple way of doing it is just asking 3 questions like, why do you think that? Can you give me an example? And perhaps ask them, well, what does that lead to? Those are pretty basic questions that lead to some kind of rational way of thinking, right? So anybody can do that and go and ask a child. Of course, that's different from running a philosophical practice with children. So when we talk about training, one thing I find the most important is actually teaching teachers what not to do. For instance, moral instruction. They find it so difficult. They find it so difficult that everything is up for scrutiny. For instance, it's a difficult and heated topic, racism and stuff like that. So instead of just shutting it down and saying you shouldn't say that, well, engage with it. And they find it so difficult because they are trained, in addition to teaching the children certain skills that they should know, as we just talked about, they also teach them some certain values. And the whole idea, and I think that's what philosophy does best, and that's also what is scary for some people when talking about philosophy, is that it moves something inside of you, and you're forced to look at yourself and say, okay, perhaps the world is not as stable as I thought it would be, right? So, instructing or training people not to do what they usually do, that's the most difficult part. The rest consists mostly in showing people how to do things. Just as I just said, what kinds of questions can you ask, and what kinds of stimuli can you use, and stuff like that. So,
I have one follow-up question, I guess, really inspired me on what she opened up now as an issue. I tried to compare these teaching teachers or trainers in philosophy for children with, for example, practitioners with those psychotherapy, for example, trainings that they do. And those are usually 4 years, in which the first 2 years, it's work on yourself. It's kind of some type of a cleansing, like in Sufism, like when Larsson said you should become the mirror first, like it's clean as a mirror to be able to allow the other to be the other and themselves. And that's really interesting because we are working with children, and I mean, working philosophy with children in high school can be a really, really tricky topic if you open up to the problem of suicide or the meaning of life or human existence and things like this, and make them wonder about this. And even more, I guess, like when you're working with children at the age of 5, 6, 7, 8, doesn't matter, 4, as we were mentioning. So I'm just wondering whether there should be some kind of like more of a scrutiny or like more strict way of how we just let these people work with the children, because as I said, like an example of if you would like to become a psychotherapy practitioner, besides having the right qualifications behind, is usually that for 2 years first, what you would do with a client, you would do it yourself.
Yes.
So you have to clean yourself and become really as a mirror to be able afterwards to enter and work with the other.
Yes. Was that a question?
Yeah, maybe more of a comment.
I would say that it's a very interesting comment, and I'll definitely pick that up, since I'm also, I think, I didn't understand how you were introducing me, but I also work with adults. I also work as a philosophical counselor for adults. So if I can couple the two, that would be very nice. You know, you have to dig into yourself first and examine your own life before you start talking about the unexamined life with others. At the same time, I want to add that this process of philosophizing with children, as I hope to have shown, is very formative for me as well, because it forces me to reflect again and again on what I took to be the right philosophical answers to certain propositions. As one concrete example was the example of willpower. I think intuitively I would also have agreed with the students that willpower has to do with choice, you know, not doing what you take to be a bad action or a wrong action, but doing something better instead. And that other perspective just really stimulated my own thoughts, you know, okay, so taking away the option, sacrificing what I take to be the most desirable, would that be a strong example? So that's just, you know, when I drive home after these sessions, my mind's really running fast. So I'm also learning along with the kids. And that's what I hope to have shown as well, as, you know, kind of have to move to the same level as the children, right? You don't want to be up here and instructing and being the what can you call it, the watchdog for truth. You want to be down there with them, and again to see things through their own perspective, which might be your own at the end of the day.
Do we have one last question?
I have a question that was partially answered. From this session, I think that philosophy for children resembles a lot to like therapy, group therapy.
Yeah.
And I would like to ask for your opinion. Do you think that philosophy for children is like group therapy, where the whole concept is to enlighten the spark for curiosity? And if the answer is yes in this question, would you consider that philosophy for children is more related to psychology and pedagogy to one extent than to philosophy itself, to academic philosophy?
Those are very good questions. The first one was, do I consider the purpose of philosophy for children to ignite a spark?
Yes.
To make them scrutinize life and remain in a state of wonder? Definitely yes to that question. As for the other one, I would say, the part of me who's also a philosophical counselor for adults would say, well, it might be therapeutic, but it's not therapy. That's also a question that I often get when people ask me, well, what does a philosophical counselor do? Are you a therapist? Well, I usually say, no, I'm not. But what I do, the conversations we have, might be therapeutic in the sense that they can move you to some other place. But the purpose, and that's the key, the purpose is not for you to move somewhere else. That's a byproduct. The purpose is to be here right now with what is right here and right now, what is taking place. So it's a way of being present, not of desiring to move somewhere else. It's a way of being present with your own wonder and curiosity. Does that? Yeah, that's okay.
If there are no other questions, I will finish the session here. Maybe we leave
Professor
that
Viktor Frankl from Vienna used to teach me cognitive therapy in the managerial studies in America. He has logotherapy, search for meaning, just as you said.
Yes.
Because philosophy, one of the main objects for philosophy is to teach children or people how to search for meaning.
Yes.
En français, raison d'être, meaning, why you are just living.
Yeah. So Is that?
Professor Frankel agrees with you.
Yes, I like Viktor Frankl a lot. I use him a lot in my work. So I'm glad to hear he agrees.
So maybe we can finish on that note. Thank you, David, for being here with us. It was a great pleasure.